Hey everyone, it's Kristen from Kbecca, and today I'm testing out some of the new Metallics gels from Decofoil. There are currently 6 different gel colors available, and I purchased 4 of them. The 2 that I don't have are the Aged Copper and Glazed Pewter. These gels are like shimmery pearlescent pastes, and they're perfect for using with stencils, which is what I'll be using them with today. You get 2 ounces of each gel in a jar, and I like that this size is on the smaller side because it makes it easier to use up the whole jar more quickly, so it won't be sitting there for months or years and possibly dry out. First up, I'm going to use the Champagne Mist Gel, and this is a nice light champagne gold color. When I open the jar, you can see how shimmery and creamy this gel is, and it's very easy to work with. For our first card, I'm using the Small Dots stencil, and you can find the cut files for this and all of the stencils that I'm using in this video in my shop. I'll include links in the description area below. I cut all of the stencils that I'm using today from Duralar, which is my favorite material to use for stencils. And if you want to find out more about cutting stencils with your die cutting machine, you can check out the video link that should be popping up right about now. I cut an A2 size panel from Strathmore Bristol paper here, and that's 4.25 inches wide by 5.5 inches tall, and this will be the card front for the first card. I'm working on a silicone craft mat, and I'll place the stencil where I want it over the card front and tape it in place on all 4 sides with washi tape. This is so it won't shift around as I'm working with it. Sometimes I also place a piece of removable double-sided tape on the underside of the card front to temporarily adhere it to the craft mat, but I didn't do that here. I'll be using the new Decofoil stencil pal to spread the gel over the stencil, and these are great because they cover a much larger area than something like an old credit card or gift card, which is what I usually use to spread these types of pastes and gels. I'll use a palette knife to get some of the gel out of the jar, and I'll spread that onto the stencil pal. Then I'll spread the gel over the stencil, and you can see as I do this how good the stencil pal is at picking up excess gel as I work, so I can use it in another area. I also think that this tool makes it a lot easier to get smooth, more even coverage with the gel. After I'm finished spreading the gel over the stencil, I'll pick up whatever excess I can and scrape that back into the jar. Then I'll carefully remove the tape, making sure to hold the stencil in place at a corner as I work so it doesn't shift as I'm removing the tape. After the tape has been removed, I'll carefully lift the stencil and immediately put it into a small plastic tub with water that I keep at the side of my work area so the gel won't have a chance to dry out before I can clean it. Now let's take a look at this nice, more subtle yet shimmery effect that the Champagne Mist Metallics gel adds in this dotted background. I'll set this aside to dry, and I can wipe up any excess gel from my craft mat using a damp paper towel. Next up is the White Pearl Metallics gel, and this is one of my favorites because I love doing white on white backgrounds, and the pearlescent finish on this one is beautiful for a white on white look with a little extra special something. I'll be using the Heart Stencil number 2 for this card, and I'll tape this down to the craft mat over the card front panel, then spread the gel evenly all over the stencil. Since this gel and the paper are both white, I can run my finger along the sides to smooth out and remove any overhanging bits of gel, and any gel that's still along the side of the paper will blend right in so you won't notice when it's dry. I'll set that aside to dry, clean up my craft mat, and next up is the Pure Gold gel. For this card, I want to highlight a smaller area, so we'll use the dotted stencil design from the Skinny Stencils Set 1 cut file set and tape that at the bottom of the card front panel. Since this is a small stencil, adding the gel with the palette knife works better than adding the gel with the stencil pal. When I remove the stencil, you'll see that I did smear one of the dots, and I can just trim that part off after the gel is dried so no one will ever know it was there. The final metallics gel that I'm testing out today is the Black Ice, which is a beautiful icy gray black color. This one would be great for Halloween cards, as well as cards with a dark and more sophisticated feel. We're using the Leaves and Berries stencil here, and we'll be stenciling onto a piece of Basil Black Licorice cardstock that's cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, which is standard A2 size. This will give us a beautiful tone-on-tone look for the card background. After I'm finished with the stenciling, I'll allow everything to dry. It took the gel about 45 minutes or so to dry. I spread it pretty thinly on the cardstock, but if you put it on more thickly, it will take longer to dry completely. I'd say wait probably an hour and a half to 2 hours or so. Next, I'll work on the other elements for the cards. First, I printed and cut the Cake Day digital stamp set on Hammermill Color Copy 80-pound cover stock. This is one of my favorite cardstocks for laser hot foiling, and I'm going to be foiling some of the images in the set to use on the cards. Whenever possible, I foil images before cutting them because I do think that foiling before cutting generally gives better foiled results, but sometimes it's just not practical to do this. So I'll be foiling these images after I cut them, and I'll be running all of the pieces through the Minc twice to try and get the best results possible. I'll be pairing the dotted background that we made earlier using the Metallics Champagne Mist with the Celebrate, Cupcake, and Cherry elements from the digital stamp set, and I'll foil them with the Minc Matte Champagne Foil, which is almost a perfect color match for the gel. I'll fold a piece of plain printer paper to use as a carrier sheet, and my Minc is all ready for foiling on a heat setting of 4. I'll place the printed pieces onto the carrier sheet, then place pieces of the champagne foil on top. This is a great way to use up all of those small leftover scraps of foil that you have around. Next, I'll run everything through the Minc 2 times, and when that's finished, I'll add a dot of glue to the back of the cherry and glue it in place on top of the cupcake. I placed a piece of black cardstock underneath here so you can hopefully see things better. I adhered the dotted background piece to a top-folding A2 size card base using a double-sided adhesive runner, and to finish the card, I'll adhere the cupcake and Celebrate pieces with 3D foam squares to give the card some dimension. And you can see what a nice color match this foil is for the Champagne Mist Metallics gel. The finished card actually looks like it's just a single color. Next, we'll be making a card with the Metallics white pearl background, and you can see how pearly the finish is when the gel is dry. For this card, we're using the birthday cake, cake stand, and It's Your Birthday sentiment images from the digital stamp set, and I'll be coloring the cake and cake stand with Faber-Castell Polychromos colored pencils. There's nothing fancy or involved with the coloring here. I'll just lay down a layer of color using circular motions as I'm coloring. When coloring small areas, I've found that using small circular motions gives the most even-looking results. For areas that I want to be darker or to have some shading, like the scalloped area on the cake stand and the side frosting area on the cake, I'll come back in with the same color that I used for the first layer and add a second layer of color. For the second layer, I do use a little more pressure while coloring than I did for the first layer. I'll list all of the pencil colors that I used in the description area below the video and also in the post if you're watching this on kbecca.com. To finish the cake, I'll come in with a metallic gold gel pen and color in the candle flames. Next, I'll add a little line of glue on the back of the cake piece at the bottom, and I'll adhere it onto the cake stand, and then I'll add 3D foam squares to the back of the cake stand, and sentiment piece, lay them out on the card front, which was adhered to a top-folding A2 size card base earlier with a double-sided adhesive runner, and remove the protective paper from each piece before adhering it in place on the front of the card. And this card is finished. Next, we'll be making a card using the background that we created with the Skinny Dots stencil and the Pure Gold Metallics gel. I trimmed the piece to remove the area where I smeared the one dot, and I'll foil the bowl, spoon, and Who Needs Cake When There's Frosting sentiment pieces using Deco Foil Gold Foil. This isn't a perfect match for the Pure Gold Metallics gel, but it's somewhat close. I ran these through the Minc 2 times, and the results are fantastic, pretty much perfect foil coverage. After the pieces are foiled, I'll color in the bowl of frosting and frosting spoon with the Polychromos colored pencils, and again, I'll list the colors that I used in the description area below. I'm using the same simple method of coloring that I used on the last card, laying down the first layer of color and coming back in with a second layer for areas that I want to be darker. After everything was colored, I wanted to lighten the color on the stripe on the bowl, so I removed some color using a light touch with a sand eraser. And to finish the card, I laid out the elements how I wanted them on the card front, adhered the Who Needs Cake part of the sentiment onto the card with a double-sided adhesive runner, and adhered the rest of the elements using 3D foam squares to give the card some dimensions. Oh, and I did also glue the spoon to the bowl of frosting before adding the foam squares. And now this card is finished. For the final card, we'll use the background that we made with the Black Ice Metallics gel. I trimmed this piece to a slightly smaller size than the card base, which is also made from the Basil Black Licorice cardstock. I'll foil the sentiment for this card using a piece of the Brutus Monroe branded Deco foil in Tide Pool. This is such a neat looking foil. It looks like an oil slick with all sorts of iridescent color swirls. Again, I ran this through the Minc 2 times and the foiled results were excellent, though it's kind of hard to see how cool this looks in the video. The iridescent color swirls are much easier to see in person. I've adhered the background piece to the card base with a double-sided adhesive runner, and there's an area on the lower left where a little bit of the Metallics gel went under the stencil, so I'm just going to cover that up with the sentiment. I'll pop the sentiment up with the 3D foam squares, just like I've done on all of the other cards. So here are all of our cards, and I love how the Metallics gel looks on each. Depending on which color you use and what kind of stencil you pair it with, you can get everything from more subtle tone-on-tone looks like most of the cards I made today, or bolder, high-contrast looks. I thought that this gel was very easy to work with. It was a soft, easy-to-spread texture, and if you're creating backgrounds or larger stenciled areas, I definitely recommend checking out the Stencil Pal. It made it much easier to evenly spread the gel over a larger area. You can find a full list of supplies used in this video in the description area below or in the area below the video if you're watching on kbecca.com. I hope that this video has been helpful for you, and if it has, I'd really appreciate it if you give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll tune in again soon.